Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. Thank you for joining today. We're gonna wrap up the month of March, which I think I've read the most, technically speaking, compared to the other couple of months in the year than I had in a while. And yeah, it's been very busy. I have listened to a couple of audiobooks, which helped, and I was already in the middle of a couple of things I end up finishing in March, which also helped. But without further ado, I'm gonna go from the least enjoyable read to the most enjoyable read of the month. Enjoyment does not always reflect quality, just putting out there. Overall, I think I had a very good reading month. I think the lowest thing is not below 3. Actually, I don't even know if we have a 3 stars. I quite enjoyed everything I've read overall, but some things definitely stood out more than others. And without further ado, that's what we're gonna do. We're gonna discuss those today. So let's start at number 8. We are gonna start with a bit of what I would say it's an unpopular opinion in especially considering like how many people ended up loving this book and putting this in their favorite of the year and so on. But at number 8, I have listened to I'm Glad My Mother Died. This is a memoir by a child actress, which, to be fair, I was unfamiliar with. I never watched iCarly before. So the only reason why I picked this up is because of the hype. It's especially a memoir around her relationship with her mother who was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer when she was 2 years old, I believe, and then kind of went in remission and then pushed Jeanette to basically follow the career that she would have liked for herself in acting. And you really see Jeanette struggling through her life with her relationship with her mother, which was quite abusive, and yeah, becoming a child actress. And also, like, you follow a bit of the aftermath, which I appreciated. There is a chunk of a book that takes place after the title came to fruition. So despite me giving this a 4 stars, because I always feel a bit uncomfortable in rating memoirs, especially when I do recognize that they are really bringing vulnerability to the pages, and she's very vulnerable and very honest in these, and I do appreciate her openness on these topics, so I just felt like I couldn't give anything less than 4 stars. However, this was not enjoyable for me. I think that's what really stood out the most. Is it was a bit of a task for me to listen to these. Probably the most impactful things that impacted actually my enjoyment is that I have no idea who she was. And funny enough, my daughter, after I stopped listening to this, like after I finished, my daughter started watching iCarly, which I found quite hilarious, like as a coincidence. So my daughter has a better idea who this woman is than I do. And so I understand that because I wasn't familiar with her, I never had an attachment with her, I never grew up watching her stuff. It could be less impactful, yet the topics covered did not necessarily make these a fruitless read. Actually, I think, again, for what she covers, it was still an important read, even if you don't know who she is. And I have to criticize a bit the audiobook. I know that she narrates with herself, and I found her monotone very boring. The way she was narrating her own story without any emotion, without any, most of the time, differences in intonation, made the audiobook extremely dull. This is just me being completely honest. So I would probably have preferred this reading physical copy of it. I will not go on and purchase a copy. I don't feel the need. I think what this book does the best is really a warning around not imposing on your kids your dreams. Like, the most harrowing thing was seeing her going through the emotional abuse. There is an element of physical abuse as well, but the emotional abuse, and also this child trying desperately to please their mother by following the mother's dream, and then kind of not being able to even make a dream of her own. So that was extremely hard, and I really appreciate the book for bringing that topic to the front. Now, of course, it discusses also a range of other abuse. And although I do understand that there is by no means the scope of this book, and I'm not saying that this book should have covered any of it, but I do wonder about the past of the mother a bit. I do wonder of a state of mind of this woman who's clearly an abuser, but also she's living with death for a good chunk of her life. She's been living, dying, and what that might have done on her psyche. Also, like, how come that she has become an abuser? Like, there was not anything about the mother's background to really tell me about, the intergenerationality of trauma, which is very often present. I'm not saying that that was the case. I'm not saying that the mother was abused herself or treated in a certain way, but I do wonder about her past and how she came to be the woman that she was, which doesn't take away the fact that she was absolutely a horrible human being, very abusive. But I do had a thought about her constantly with threat of dying above her head. Just a question mark in my mind, which again I don't expect the book to, the book is about Janae, it's not about the mother in itself, but questions. So overall, I am glad that I now know what everyone was talking about. I'm now familiar with the story, and I did take, a very few important lessons from it. But yeah, done and dusted. Then I will have to put Breath. This is another non-fiction, and it's the exploration of the author of how we kind of lost, at least in Western culture, the art of breathing properly. And as someone who has suffered from a range of issues around his breathing, his mouth, snoring, sleep apnea, and so on, he decides to go on this almost 10-year journey of researching methods of better breathing and how come that we are now riddled to, from all of those kind of respiratory diseases, and finding answers to those questions. So this is what the book is about. It's the summary of his 10 years research, and this is also 4 stars, so that's why I'm saying I had a very great reading month overall. Now, I really appreciated all the effort that went into this book. I found most of his book quite interesting, and I definitely took away a couple of breathing techniques that I want to explore more. He also leaves clear marks around his, we can follow his traces. He leaves clear websites and further resources for us to explore, which again, I appreciate a lot, because if I want to get myself more information, now I know where to go. I don't have to just Google it randomly. So it does a very good job of writing a non-fiction packed with information. So why 4 stars? Why not 5 stars? There are a couple of things that I still find myself at odds with. First of all, a very, very petty thing if you want, but also I am quite mindful of that. He does take some time to describe physically people he meets throughout his journey. And at the very beginning, he starts a chapter discussing the encounter with this woman who he describes as having woolly eyebrows and oversized white teeth. And in my mind, I was like, well, I hope she doesn't read this book, because that's not a very flattering way of describing someone. I'm pretty sure I would not want to read a description of me written by you. Like, I just thought, how come that in a non-fiction like this, which has nothing to do with aesthetic or how someone presents to the world, why bothering writing a sentence or 2 sentences about the physical appearance of someone? I just found it not necessary, and quite outright offensive for the people that might read this. When he's looking at our history and how we develop the skull and our respiratory system, which was extremely interesting. It describes how nowadays, if a Homo erectus was to walk in the subway, no one would really pay attention. I'm like, maybe not in New York, but where I am, I'm pretty sure people would at least stare. So some of his comments made me laugh a bit. I also found a couple of his claims around some breathing techniques more akin to pseudoscience rather than actually being backing up by proper scientific proof. For example, or sometimes some of the claims were lacking a bit of a distinction, which I thought would be important. So for example, he talks about a breathing technique associated with cold plunge. And he says, it's been found that doing this really improves your health. Okay, but then have I ever done studies just with the breathing in itself and just with the cold plunge? Because I know that there have been studies like that, but he does not mention them. So I was just wondering to unpack it a bit more and notice if the breathing in itself, leads you to these benefits, if a cold plunge leads you to these benefits. Are they, though, more statistically significant if they're together? Or that doesn't matter, or the breathing you can leave out, and actually it's the cold plunge in itself it brings the benefits. That's what I'm saying. Like, when you discuss certain studies, it is important to unpack things, because it's easy to say you have to do a breathing and the cold plunge, but then maybe you read a study and the breathing was pointless, or actually combined are more powerful than the singular one taken in its solitary. And I know that might be a bit petty in these things and very anal, is that how you say, on certain things, but yeah, there is a part of me that wished for more distinctions or more degrees of knowledge on some of the research he brings to the table, or some of those studies are outright without any scientific proof behind. He doesn't hide behind these things. He might say, there is no scientific proof behind these. I've just spoken with this group of people and noticed these things out on my own. But when you write a nonfiction, which is semi-scientific like this, I always seek more empirical studies or empirical proof. And in the absence of those, I would have liked for him to maybe put more of himself in the pages on what he actually found helpful, because I noticed that he discusses a bunch of breathing techniques, some of them at odds with each other, quite contradicting, and yet he does not tell us which one he benefited from the most. And I do understand that things will work differently for different individuals. I'm not saying that there is like one size fit all, but I would have loved for him to at least share his experience, because there is a lot of him doing this research. He does bring himself to the page quite a lot. And then I found out that he does bring himself to the pages to describe someone he meets or telling us about this experiment he has done, but does not then tell us about, oh, from this experiment, these are the benefits I experienced. It doesn't really do that much. He does say toward the end, the thing that he does kind of do a combination of different breathing techniques that he's added in. He does a mix of them. I found their list quite helpful. I myself adopted a couple that I find quite helpful, especially to get to sleep. So I do think that this is a very, very helpful non-fiction book to read and experiment with. And I will definitely go on and do more research. As someone who's working therapeutic services, I'm always looking, for methods to, use the breath in the most healthy and powerful way you can to calm the mind. So yeah, very glad I've read these, but I've just noticed a couple of things here and there. Okay, next we got a very different read, which I feel like I need to remind people this is an enjoyment list rather than quality list, because I've put a number 6, onyxstorm, and this is the third in the Empyrean series. We all know what this is about. It really does not need introduction, but if I have to give you a synopsis about Violet, she attends an academy where they train to ride dragons and being kick-ass. When she is there, she meets the son of a traitor's duke, who's a bit of an asshole to her, and then a lot of things happen. There are a lot of combat and intrigue and other stuff, PG-18, but mostly what you need to know is there are dragons, and the dragons are the coolest part of this. And in the first 1/4, I really kept asking myself, what am I doing here? What am I listening to? There were a lot of names thrown at us which I had never heard before, or I didn't remember. And then I heard other reviews, and people that actually have almost read these back to back still got confused. So I'm like, okay, it's not only me, this was actually genuinely confusing. So a lot of people are thrown at us. The romance felt almost a bit cringy. It's not new anymore. So when you repeat the same things over and over again, there is only an amount of time where I am glad to follow you around if really nothing else is happening. So I had started to even laugh a bit of Zayn sentences, which is never good, because I used to be a fan of him. Like, he was hot and broody and all the things I tend to like, and then all of a sudden now he was becoming too sweet in a sense, and yeah, so a rough start. But then they sail for distant lands, and when actually there is a good chunk of this story that it's about traveling around, and that's when the book recaptured my attention. I found the pace very much improved. The romance does take a back seat because we're actually doing a lot of action and traveling, which I appreciated, because then when the romance was there, I had felt the distance from, between the two, and so now I could appreciate them gathering again together. So yeah, the spark was reignited a bit for me. So yeah, overall I think this was highly entertaining. I also need to praise the audiobook narrator. Sorry to compare and contrast, but I did notice the huge difference between the intonations and the cast of characters that I read onyxstorm, which they did a brilliant job, compared to, for example, how I'm Glad My Mother Died, like monotone. It was just so contrasting because I've listened to this back to back. So yeah, that's to say, onyxstorm, the narrators are great. I don't know if I will ever acquire a physical copy of these. For now, it's a series that for me it's a between, I think I gave this 3.5, 3.75, I don't remember. I enjoyed the ending. I think she does stick the landing, as always. She stick the landing for the last 3 books, and this as well. There is a trope at the end that I don't particularly like, but the way it's done, it's not completely the trope I was thinking of. So the way she's done it with, it's a bit of a trope, but not completely, I'm okay with. I think it keeps the attention going, makes you want to read the next. So I will pick up the audiobook on Everard for the next one. Okay, so then I listened to A Psalm for the Wild build, which, by the way, I called A Psalm for the Wild without build for like the longest time. So anyway, I listened to this on audiobook, and this is really the story of this tea monk, which, by the way, it's the coolest job I've ever heard of, in a future world where humanity lives in one part of the world, but there is a lot of wilderness where humans don't really go. So this tea monk decides to actually explore the wilderness on his own, to take a break from humanity, which I completely get, to be fair. And while he's in the wilderness, he comes across a robot who has a voracious curiosity for humanity, and he's got a tea monk there, and he's the only human he has seen, so he needs to take this opportunity to ask the monk all the questions he can around humanity. And truly, it is their journey. It is what's considered like a cozy sci-fi, cozy fantasy, cozy sci-fi, not my cup of tea in general. And I must say the audiobook wasn't the best choice for me because I kept getting distracted. Because of the whimsical writing, which was very nice writing, but again, it didn't, my mind would wander, especially because I do listen to audiobook while doing other stuff. So often I would just go back and I would have missed a few minutes here and there. So I gave it like a generic 4 stars rating, which might potentially change if I was to actually pick up a physical copy of these, which I might in the future. I'm not in any rush though, because again, although this book was exactly what everyone else said, it was cozy, heartwarming, covering a lot of very important, relevant topics. It was just a hug. I really love, you know, living in a city and having little access to nature. I just loved the imagery of them walking through the wilderness. It really struck a chord within me. So the atmosphere was there. So every praise I've heard for this book, I recognize it. I said, okay, I see it. And I do feel most of it as well. The robot was absolutely adorable. The discussions, again, spot on. Especially I appreciate the discussion we have around, you know, the meaning of life and what purpose we serve. I was like, I agree with the robot 100%. Like everything he's saying, you could have taken from my mind and put in his mouth. Exactly what I thought. So I could relate with a lot of these discussions. Yet, because there are things I already think myself on an everyday basis, I thought maybe seeing them on pages would seeing them on page would be such a revelation for me. Instead, I found them like, oh yeah, that's exactly what I think. Cool. But move on. Like it didn't feel like mind-blowing for me, and that's probably why I didn't connect. Also considering that again, I don't really do cozy fantasy and cozy sci-fi in this case. So it's something I appreciate reading now and then. But also I'm like, at this moment in time, it's not the perfect fit always. So we'll definitely pick up the sequel though. When I'm in the mood for something just cozy, for a warm hug, I might. I realized that recently I'm just not very much in a cuddly, cozy mood. I'm very much like, give me action and gore. I will wait until I'm in a better, I think, mental state, or like I'm more like ready to accept this book for where it is without trying to, without wishing for this to be more full of action or weather, because I think it wouldn't be fair on the book to read the sequels. But I will definitely read the sequels, and I really, really like her prose. Okay, so we are ready for the next one. The next one is both I agree with you, but also have an unpopular opinion on these, because at number 4 I have 11/22/63 by Stephen King. I read this mammoth, it's 800 pages. I started in January and finished in March. So this is a sci-fi, yes, but not really. Is it a fantasy? I would say no. Is it a thriller? Yes, but not just that. Is it a love story? Unfortunately, it is. And I'm sorry, I know I'm a bit of a bitch. I'll get to that in a second. Anyway, this is Stephen King take on time travel. You follow Jake. For a series of events, he manages to go back in time to a specific time, precisely 1958, and he's given the task of trying to stop Kennedy's assassination in 63. The remaining 700 pages is really a story about how, you know, it's a shitty idea to travel in time. And I thought I had learned that lesson from Back to the Future, but I didn't mind the refresher. So, King is king. King is a master at storytelling. And you might not enjoy his plots, but I think we can all recognize that he has a certain peculiarity to his writing and certain skills that I don't see many times replicated, if ever. I think King's write a story with the introspections and the you know, you really follow his characters. Often they are like first person, like it was in this case. So it's really feeling like he's telling a story about anyone else. Like, it feels so real. Sometimes, you know, like, you read a story and the story, you can definitely tell that it's a narration of a fantastical story. With King, at times it makes me question, how have you not lived this life? Because that's how good you are at writing these. And he manages to write so well that despite me not knowing a lot of the terminology in this, because he's talking about terms and jargon that was used at the time in America, which I'm completely unfamiliar with, but also, like, he tells a story sometimes that it's slow paced, sometimes it's even about a topic or like a particular point of a plot that I'm personally not very interested in, but because of his writing I can't put the book down. And despite me saying, well, it took me 3 months to read these, it's just because of the way I rotate through books that I read, not because I've ever found myself like wanting to put this down and not picking up again. I even had toward the first half, which I appreciated a lot, moments where, like, do I call it in sick because I can't put this book down, and I found myself wanting almost to having to read these only and not having the whole rot of books. Things did slow down in the latter half. I think when I got used to the story and when the love story is introduced toward the halfway point, things definitely take a turn for the worst for me. So at that point I was happy to let it down for a few hours or days to read something else. But overall, I cannot not praise his writing style, and again his storytelling. It's amazing. Now, I've got so much to say about this, but I will try to be quite succinct. I again loved the first half. I think it's full of action, full of also everyday predicament that would stand in the way of our main protagonist getting his goal accomplished. I found that extremely, again, relatable, funny to read, entertaining, and also I found the reasons behind Jake's motivations to carry on certain acts very honorable, and I was really rooting for Jake because of, you know, what I perceived of your upholding these values that I share too. So go for it, go for it. And personally, in books at least, I don't mind when, in order to do good, you have to apply a bit of violence. Again, I'm talking about reading fiction. I also appreciated that it does, although it really depicts this 1958 period as, you know, the America you might see in movies, where it really made me want, like, I want to go and live there. It does include a couple of sentences even there to remind us all that America at the time wasn't the lens of dreams for everyone equally. So I appreciate that it does take the time to do so. At the same time, though, I must say that while I understand why he might use the N-word, using dialogue from people living in the era that might use that, I found a couple of times also distasteful the fact that Jake, who comes from 2011, still uses it to refer to someone when he's not directly speaking to adapt to the era, if it makes sense. Maybe 1 or 2 sentences, 700 pages to be fair, but still a couple of sentences where he refers to someone who's black as with N-word without having any justification to do so. To be fair, even in a direct dialogue with a person of the time, you could have avoided it. I just question how come he made that choice, to be fair, because I think it's a questionable choice. But anyway, the other thing is I really disliked is the wrong thing. I didn't care much about the love for majority of it. I didn't warm up to the love interest until she really finds out a bit more about him toward the end, and she does eventually become quite cool. I really enjoyed the ending part, but for a good chunk in the middle I was like, okay, this is all about the love story, and I don't see it. I also found that King, at the end of the day, he is still a man writing about the enjoyment of a first sexual encounter from a woman perspective quite poorly, quite in a far-fetched way. There was like, you know, she goes from virgin to vixen in the span of like a few minutes, and I thought like, listen man, it's okay. She might not have an orgasm the first time you have sex with her, especially if she's a virgin, she doesn't know what she's doing. It's okay for you if your character doesn't make her come the first time around. It doesn't not mean that he's not good at it. So it was just like a couple of sentences here and there about women, and especially, you know, sexual encounters, the sex encounters. I was like, why am I reading this explicit sex scene? It's not needed for the purpose of the story. It's not what I signed up for. It has nothing to do with time travel. So both things I noticed them out of contrast, right? Because I appreciated, for example, Jake's take on, you know, when someone becomes disfigured and, you know, on not looking the same anymore because of accidents or whatever. Like how he takes the time to discuss the you know, grief that comes with life-changing injuries and, you know, not looking the same and the pain that comes with it. So truly appreciated the time it takes to delve bit deep into that. But at the same time, for someone who kept saying, I don't care if you look different, he would mention that all the time. So all the time the character was on page, like, oh, her face looked like this, or she smiled but the face looked like this, but I don't care about it. I'm just like, fucking stop mentioning it if you don't care about it. It felt contradicting, it felt false at one point, because if you, every time you see that character, that you say, I don't care if you look different, but then you keep mentioning it over and over and over again, I guess you do care a bit about that, right? So yeah, picked up on that. Another thing that I found quite fascinating was the whole Lee part of the plot. Again, this is not a spoiler, but the actual plot linked to Let's Save President Kennedy was the most fascinating part for me of the book, and I've really enjoyed how cleverly Jake goes about it, because he's going about it very cleverly. Found Jake, because I don't want to say it's King's perspective, okay? Let's say that I don't know that. I'm just saying that Jake's perspective on domestic violence, or, you know, the fact that this man, before he even thought about killing the president, it was a, you know, a wife beater. It was a very violent, horrible man, and all points like, oh, he deserves to die because he wants to kill the president. I would argue that he definitely deserves at least jail time for what he's doing to his wife. So I understand that Jake was living in a time where domestic violence was not really talked about, was accepted, but still he comes from 2011, and I would have expected the character to have more than just a couple of sentences of disdain around wife beating. The ending was expected. It was how I would predict this to go, and I found it quite realistic, if you want, in suspending any belief. Fair enough, that was the ending that you chose. I found the ending poignant. I enjoyed the ending. I also must say that I really found, like, I was so hyped when we have cameos from characters of a story I've loved, and I could now see all the Easter eggs a bit, and I was like, oh, and I imagine the more I read about King, the more I would pick up on these Easter eggs. And ultimately, that must be said, it's a full 4 stars. I love the experience of reading this book. Rather than potentially all the plot points, some didn't work that well for me, but overall the experience of just staying for 700 pages with his writing, I really enjoyed. And finally, must say that, as King says, a story sometimes is just a story. And I agree, this was just a story and was entertaining. And number 3, I've got the second book in a trilogy, which is The House with the Golden Door. The first book is The Wolf Den. It's a historical fiction, and in the first book you follow Amara, a Greek slave that it's given in, you know, sold to prostitution in a brothel in Pompeii. And you really follow her trying to make a better life for herself with very dire circumstances that she is given by life. And I really loved the first book. It was a book club pick, loved it, and so I was very eager to continue on. It took me almost a year, if not maybe more than a year actually, to go on, but I've already picked up the sequel because of this was a very intense read. It's a very intense read. I found her writing quite addicting. It makes it easy writing to immerse yourself in this story and just wanting to, you know, have more and more. And while I've read many historical fiction that are more slow paced, I take more time to set the scene, this doesn't do that much. It's less atmospheric, if you want. It's very much like to action after action and events after events, which I in this case found very entertaining. I'm gonna be very conscious of spoilers, but at the same time I do understand if you want to skip around, if you don't want to hear anything. I'm not gonna spoil anything, but I must mention a couple of things here and there in the context to make my point come across. Amara is we're seeing her in a different light in this second book. I think I struggle with her a bit more, because while I found quite realistic the fact that once you're given more, you often have resentment for people that have lived through your situation, and you don't have the same contempt or resentment for people that never got you because they never lived through that, because they're more privileged. So the way she goes about making a life for herself in a very almost cruel way by pushing away her past, I found it realistic, but also I do like characters that have a higher moral value. I want to think that we can do better than that, and Amara does not do better than that. So that was a bit disappointing, and at the same time I appreciate the author just saying, well, this is the character I'm gonna give you. You might not like her, but this is her story, and I will follow along that story because I'm curious. In a sense, at times I was thinking of the last sentence in Animal Farm by George Orwell. Anyway, I also want to say though that despite these being action-packed, there are some moments where the author takes the time to slightly dip her toes in a bit more nuanced topics, more in-depth topics. She does talk about feeling shame for someone you love and how that is impacting you. He also talks about how you would, you know, at times lash out to people that you can lash out with just because you don't have a space or an occasion to actually get angry at the people that do deserve it. So the complexity of rage and where it comes out, the complexity of shame, which is such like a big topic, that are slightly delved into at times, you know, here and there. I really appreciated that. And I know I was looking at something tragic happening below my eyes. There are other girls in the brothel in the first book, and you kind of follow Amara's relationship with them changing as she changes and her situation changes, and it was heartbreaking seeing those relationship and the friendship and how hard it is to maintain certain friendship, and when envy comes in. And there were some moments relating to the friendship where some girls would stand up to Amara and reminding her of how poorly she was treating her. I was like, yeah, okay, yeah, I'm on your side because she's behaving shittily. And at the same time that there are some plot twists happening that would just, you know, leave me with my mouth hanging open. It was like, what? And it's like, okay, and inside you should have seen it coming. But yeah, so what's to say, it really worked for me. It was definitely something that made me question, made me, oh, do I like this? Do I not like this character? I get why she's doing it, but it's so crude to having to see, or it's so heartbreaking having to see. That made this experience of reading this book like a great experience. The love part in these, there is a love part in these. I had a lot of ambivalent feelings there. I just didn't feel the connection between these two characters. I didn't feel the love, I didn't feel the passion. And also I thought that what was happening was a bit silly for the characters not to see how this could go on and become like such a bad idea in the end. And so I was like, that's just dumb. Like, why are you doing this? Also, I'm just gonna put it there. I'm not saying who he is, what she is in it, but there is a character at one point that's called Rufina. And I'm like, really? Rufina? Really? With all the bloody names that you could come up with? And there were also moments in which male men at the time, like we're talking about Pompeii AD, around, you know, before the actual volcano explosion, so we're talking about eons ago. So how she would take some time to discuss how men viewed women, and it was just chilling. Men in this book say certain sentences that chilled me to the bone. And how, you know, she was also in a sense in this book, our protagonist and characters around her how you see these women trying to survive a society that's made to exploit and don't give a shit about them. And so they need to be as clever as possible with the means that they're given. So I do like that. I think, you know, the author does not shy away from saying, yeah, well, I need to do shitty things in order to get a bit of my dignity back, or in order to get a bit of, you know, safety for myself. We can't afford to be always kind and generous. At times we have to bite to get a bit of food. Appreciate that topic and how it's covered in this. Yet I wished, in a sense, that she had taken more time to explore that even more. I thought there was definitely potential to explore so much more nuances. But at the end of the day, I see this as like almost like an action, almost an action historical fiction where the focus is very much on the continuation of a plot and, you know, plot twist and events after event. I enjoy it. I immediately pick up the sequel, so that should tell you how much I loved it. And number 2, really, to be fair, The House with the Golden Door and number 2, they could be interchangeable. There is a reason why I put them in this order, which I'm gonna go in a second, but truly I love them both. Number 2, I've got A Monsoon Rising by Thea Guanzon. I think this is the second book in what I perceive is gonna be a trilogy. The first one is The Hurricane Wars, which I read last year. It's a Fairloot edition, stunning edition. Now, what is the first book about? Truly, this is the story about light versus darkness. What if the daughter of light has to accept an arranged marriage with the son of darkness? Can they make it work? It is a Raylo, I believe, fanfic inspired, and I think there's also some elements of a Grisha trilogy from the Darkling and Alina Starkov. Like, there are like some elements, some inspiration that's been taken from it, but that's what it really is. It's an arranged marriage between a princess of light and a prince of darkness. Now, in order to like this book and this trilogy, you have to A, love romantic fantasy, and B, love these characters. Now, I am happy to report that I don't mind at all, number 1. Now and then I do enjoy some romantic fantasy, if well done. And I'm definitely on board with point B. I loved these characters. So for me, reading these, which is very much a continuation from the first book, was a delight. And that's why this one is a number 2. Ultimately, although enjoyment-wise, they're very much the same with The House with the Golden Door, is because I love the romance in this. If you though don't like romantic fantasy or don't connect with the characters, I think this series will not hold much enjoyment or for you, and therefore I would not suggest it if it makes sense. So if you really loved the first book, you're probably gonna love the second book, but if you didn't like the first book, there's no point in continuing on, because it's very much more of the same where the focus is the romance and not the fantasy plot at all, almost. I have also to say though, I love her writing. Like, I think, you know, you cannot like the story, you cannot even like the characters, but she has a way of putting words on a page that makes this just a delight to read. The fantasy plot though is undeniably poorly developed, in my opinion. Like, it is there, but it's very much in the background. It doesn't really matter. It's not why we are there. And because I knew this from the start, I knew exactly what I was gonna get into, and I was in just for the pining of these two characters, these enemies we don't know. I was there for it, and I got a lot of them in these, so I was so happy in the end. Yes, this is also very spicy, very spicy. Compared to the first one, I don't know, if the first one I would give it like a 2 out of 5, this is definitely a 4 out of 5. Yet I often do not like sex in books. Lately I've noticed that the more I used to read more romantic fantasy, I used to read way more romance books, but I've now stopped. And part of the reason is also because there is a lot of sex scenes, and I found them oddly discomforting, in the sense that either they are too absurd, like you have to think about like the mechanics, like it's not possible, or they were cringy, or they were described in a very mechanical, vulgar way, and I don't like that. Here, although it's full of spice, it's very explicit. I still love her writing so much. I think she does it quite tastefully, to a great extent. Now, of course, there are some technical terms which I don't think you can avoid if you want to have such like vivid depiction of sex scenes, but overall it's done still with the sweetness that it's kind of carry on between those two characters, and it's continued. So I loved the love in these. Carnal love, but also like the mental and the affection, cognitive affection between the two, and the way they build this bond. Now, despite saying that the fantasy plot, it wasn't the greatest, I think she does take her time to go in a couple of details that I found particularly entertaining, and I've not seen done often. For example, she talks about dragons, and she talks about how they smell, and spoiler alert, they smell bad because they are wild creatures that eat raw animals and definitely don't brush their teeth, and so they smell like animals in the wild. And I really appreciated that point of saying, well, actually, I've been near dragons, they smell horrible. Love that. I found a couple of points endearing. There was a lot of kind of funny banter between the two, but also like characters around them knowing that they're very much enemies, now noticing what happens and how their relationship develop, making a lot of fun of that, or just, you know, making jokes. And I also enjoyed how she does explore, to a tiny bit at least, trauma, and now, you know, some of the characters just, in order to cope with the trauma, they just need to push the memories away, and then I can't think about this, I just need to get things done. And that's very true of trauma. So I do find, you know, the author does take at least some time to explore how characters deal with their own trauma, and I appreciate that. And I can't wait to read the next one. I want to spend more time with these beloved characters. You need to love them. You need to love them in order to love this book. And I do. And I find myself lucky because now I can have the best of times while reading this trilogy. I had lunch in between book number 2 and book number 1. So I hope I don't have anything stuck on my teeth. And at number 1, we had a book that since I started reading it, I knew it was going to be our number 1. And it's that strong of a book. And I am talking about A Tyranny of Faith. Yes, this is book number 2 in the Empire of the Wolf trilogy. First book, you follow a small retinue of people going around the empire, solving crimes and bringing the culprit to justice. One of, you know, the more prominent member of this group is a justice. It's called Vonwald. I believe it's how you pronounce it. Apologies if it's not, but Vonwald is a justice, and he is the one that knows the law the best, and he will then investigate the crime and bring to justice and decide the sentence for the culprit. And Vonwald is accompanied, as I said, by a bunch of characters and they all work for him. It's a very small group, and our main point of view we actually follow is Helena, his apprentice, so Vonwald's apprentice, and she is writing the story as if she's writing a diary, as she's writing a book about events from the past. Now, many people will say that, you know, the Justice of Kings was amazing, and then the series actually went a bit down here. I've heard many reviews saying, you know, loved the first one, not so much the second and third one, because it also goes into more like a horror fantasy style. Personally, the opposite happened with these. I enjoyed the first book, but it didn't blow my mind. This one, step by step, climbed its way to the 5-star haven. Maybe we are not exactly there. I'm indecisive between a 4.75 and a 5. I rounded up to a 5, but we are definitely at the gates. I love horror, combining that with fantasy, good writing, and cool characterization, and just a very good adventure. It just works for me, and so I found actually that the more horror it's brought to the pages, the more I am enjoying the series. Vonwald has been an interesting character since book 1. In this one, he remains interesting. He's more on the backdrop on a lot of things, but yet when he comes in, some of the things he says and some of his almost like abrupt style of being, because of his past and because of all the things in his mind, I found quite fascinating. I really definitely see the fascination of Vonwald. Like, you know, Vonwald is portrayed as this fascinating, mighty, almost unreachable figure, and I kind of get it. I get the Helena perspective on him and other people's perspective on him. It's very well communicated through the story. Okay, I have the same feelings about him as you do. Not always, it doesn't always happen like this. Sometimes, you know, a character is portrayed in a way that I don't perceive or I'm not attuned in. Definitely here I am with Helena on, you know, the fascination and almost like anger and everything that comes with it. And Helena, I couldn't really connect with her in the first book, while in here I truly enjoyed her point of view. I really enjoyed how she grows. She grows by shedding a bit the innocence that comes with, you know, being younger and experiencing things for the first time. Now she's a bit more seasoned and she does make tougher choices, and I really enjoyed how she has become kick-ass in this book. So yeah, I was on board with her as well, and all the other characters. There are a couple of friends that work and travel with Helena and Bombald. Without, you know, giving away anything, I really cherish these 4 characters. Therefore, you know, take an educated guess around, you know, my feelings throughout this book, especially toward the end. And even the writing style, where, you know, she might say a sentence like, we thought these, and then in the end we turn out to be all wrong. Initially, in the first book, I was like, oh, that feels quite spoilery to me, because you're already telling me that whether I'm reading now, it's going to be true in a second or in a few pages. And instead, I kind of grew fond of that. It is a bit spoilery, yes it is, but I am now eager to find out how that thing happens. How do things twist around, how you're gonna make it happen, and most of the times I've been rewarded with very engaging, entertaining events that make that thing go the opposite way than what Elena says they initially thought it would be. Very interesting conversations around grief. If I talk about grief having thresholds and, you know, kind of almost like levels, could really relate to that topic. It really made me think. I really enjoyed the discussion around religion and the purpose of, you know, some of the purpose of religion, of, you know, keeping people in check or where there is, and that was, I thought, quite poignant, kind of like, okay, you got my attention here, I'm listening in. It's very maybe similar times of what I think, so when I can think like a character, I will tend to relate more to the character and therefore care more for that character, right? It's like a bit of a cycle. Is it all perfect? No. I think why I'm a bit indecisive around 7.75 or 5 is because I think that whodunit part of this is quite obvious from the start. As soon as we are introduced to a certain cast of characters, I was like, okay, this is what probably happened, and I was right in the end. It doesn't take away the fact that it was entertaining to find out how right I was, but I kind of guessed it very early on. And also the end I found quite rushed a bit. So in a sense it made me think like, okay, this doesn't feel like a proper ending, like I need to read the next one right immediately after, so I kind of continue on, and I will do so. I am traveling now in April, so I will be out of the country for a little while, but when I come back I think I want to read another Abercrombie book before going back into these, but this one is, the third one is gonna be picked up very soon by me. So guys, that was it for the month of March. Great reading month, and I'm honestly so excited about especially my fantasy list of books I want to cover. So I read books like 6 books at a time. One is always going to be like a fantasy, epic high fantasy tends to be. So I have got like a few big titles upcoming, and the only reason why I'm not gonna bring the heroes with me to Italy is because I don't want to ruin it by just carrying around on trains and just moving around a lot during the holidays. But it is it's gonna be soon. It's gonna be soon. I'm gonna read Job Abercrombie. I want to finish the, you know, the Empire of the Wolf series. I want to finish Jade Legacy. I need to read, and a couple of other titles here and there. So I'm really looking forward to that. I'm actually feel excitement about the idea of, you know, continuing reading. And recently what I've read in the fantasy genre has really sparked the love I have for fantasy again. So now I'm like, I want to read them all right now in this moment. So as I said, I will be traveling in April. Not that I update regularly, but I will be absent for a few weeks, and then I hope to make a comeback at the end of April with some unboxings, my April wrap up. Let's see what I can read while I'm away. I've got script with me, so there are a few titles I've seen. I'm gonna probably carry on a couple of books I don't mind necessarily getting, you know, a bit worn during the travel. But thank you so much for watching. If you want to stick around, you know what to do. And yeah, I hope to chat with you in the comments down below, and I really wish you to go well, that you take care of yourself, and I will see you next time. Ciao!